So I don't know if you guys saw this, but Zelensky recently said that the Chinese are providing weapons to Russia. Now, it's been a pretty well-known public fact that dual-use components, things like CNC machines that help in the machinery process of producing Russian munitions, or different electrical components and electronic components for the innards of drones, and different machine goods and other different dual-use components have been in heavy use by the Russians from the Chinese market, as well as the Chinese market providing them still a base to consume their energy exports, even if it is discounted significantly. So this has been a public secret. I mean, not a public secret. It's been public knowledge for a while. And in the last few years, we have seen different reports of both Chinese soldiers being in like joining the Russian army, signing contracts with them to make money. These are not, we have yet to find evidence of Chinese soldiers in the PLA, actively in the PLA, and not retired soldiers going there for a paycheck doing it. But for years, we've covered on this channel vlogs from Chinese soldiers talking about their experience in the Russian army. We just saw the Zelensky's government catch a bunch of new soldiers that they claim are also Chinese and seem to speak pretty clear and concise Mandarin. And it doesn't look like they're lying. I mean, it could be someone putting on an act, but there is a pretty large swath of evidence and examples of Chinese citizens joining the Russian armed forces to assist in their invasion of Ukraine for profit. But there has always been one even if the Chinese deny this, this is probably one of the most significant ways outside of the dual use components that this Chinese participation in the war, indirect, has been manifesting in the media, as Zelensky has talked about it pretty openly to try to bring attention to it. But this right here, China providing weapons to Russia, this is different entirely. Since the start of the war, China has said steadfast that they are not going to provide any weapons to the Russians, that they have no interest in participating in this extremely brutal and deadly war, that they do not want to add fuel to the fire. And they say that in a variation of different ways, and they hope that both sides can come to a peaceful resolution and kumbaya, and all you need is love, right? Blah, blah, blah. And that's been their general position as they've profiteered from the side effects of the war, especially when it comes to the massive expansion in drone production, as Chinese drone parts have dominated both the Russian and Ukrainian sides of this war, and Chinese drone manufacturers in the civilian sector have expanded to accommodate and have accommodated their products to accommodate the units. I have talked to a few different units that say like at the start, the Chinese would send them with GPSs and they would send them with all these different components to Poland before then they would be brought over the border in convoys because they can't be sold directly to Ukraine. But in recent variations, you can see that the GPS has been taken out because you're not going to need a GPS for a 3 to 4 kilometer one-way flight. And they take out a lot of the different components that add pointless weight and could take away from the size of the payload you want to deliver to your enemy. So that these manufacturers, even if they legally under Chinese law cannot provide the Ukrainians or the Russian with drones, were still changing their drones to be more applicable for the battlefield because they still understood their market. These are all the things that we had an idea that were going on. We've heard about secret drone programs, but this is something that the Chinese denied they would ever do. They have said steadfastly that they are not doing it. And the American government has yet to say that they found evidence to the contrary. Outside of a few instances of shotguns being found here and there, the American government has not reported that they've been providing large-scale amounts of weapons. Now Zelensky has something else to say. China is supplying weapons to Russia, President Volodymyr Zelensky said on April 17th, today, days after Ukrainian soldiers captured Chinese nationals fighting for Russia's army. Today, we have general information from the security services of Ukraine, from intelligence about gunpowder and artillery. I think we will be able to say in detail next week that we believe that Chinese representatives are engaged in the production of some weapons on the territory of Russia, he added. Zelensky's statement marks Kiev's first confirmation that Beijing supports Russia's war effort by providing weapons. Iran and North Korea are two other allies of Moscow to supply Russia with arms. Multiple reports have previously suggested that China sends weapons to Russia amid Moscow's all-out war against Ukraine, but Beijing denied it. In the summer of 2024, Zelensky said that China confirmed it wouldn't provide Russia with arms. Beijing has officially positioned itself as neutral towards Russia's war against Ukraine, but has simultaneously deepened economic ties with Moscow and backed Russia against Western sanctions. So, if it is true that China is providing Russia with gunpowder and artillery, not only would this be helpful to the Russians, this would be particularly helpful for the Russians. So artillery is pretty self-explanatory. The Russians cannot produce enough artillery to keep their cannons firing at a consistent rate all across the front line. They cannot keep the same rate of fire that they had when the war first started back. Well, not first started, but the full-scale war started back in 2022. And so they have looked to the North Koreans to make up the difference. And there are reports indicating that 40 to 50%, a very significant chunk of the of the Russian armed forces artillery arsenal, of the artillery shells that are being fired at Ukraine, are from North Korea, indicating that Russia has not been able to keep up the pace when it comes to production and would need artillery from other nations, from other suppliers, from other stockpiles, if they want to keep up the offensive pressure that they've so far thrown against Ukraine, unless they're going to find some way to massively expand production at this point in the war. As for gunpowder, gunpowder is a very critical component for the production of not only artillery, but any other number of projectile that are launched at the enemy. So if you're going to be talking about MLRS, multiple launcher rocket systems, if you're going to be talking about mortars, you know, I mean, I know mortar sometimes falls under artillery, but, you know, there's the more traditional, you know, bigger artillery cannons and there's the mortar cannons. Point is, gunpowder is crucial in any type of fired projectile. And it is also something that has been a production bottleneck for the West. I mean, if you read anything, any detail about why exactly the West has had so much trouble in producing artillery in a fast manner to help keep up with Ukraine's ammunition hunger, it's in large part due to the TNT bottleneck and the fact that they don't have enough of it. They have enough metal. It's not like, oh, we ran out of we ran out of steel, everybody. No, it was TNT was a big bottleneck for production. And even if you had 10, 20, 30, 40 billion dollars just plopped down at one point, that's not just going to magically spawn more TNT. In fact, just throwing more money at it would actually just make the TNT more expensive if you don't increase the supply. And so this is something that has been a real problem for Western production. And so you could imagine that it could easily become a problem for Russian production as well, especially as they're locked off from many of the producers of this in the international markets due to the sanction regime instituted by the West. So both artillery and gunpowder could both be very useful to the Russians at this point in the war, especially as artillery shell stockpiles have from the Soviet ties dried up more and more and more, and what's left over is not exactly of an let's just say high quality, not exactly of a high quality. If this is true, this would be massive egg on the face of China as a nation state that has tried to claim itself as a neutral nation, one that is not profiteering from the war and is not supporting imperialist war goals by the Kremlin in taking and conquering territory and asserting itself in Europe in the largest war in Europe since World War II. It would be massive egg on the face of the Chinese. But besides the Chinese being embarrassed, which could also, if the Chinese bite it on the nail, you know, bite the bullet and just deal with it, they might be like, okay, well, now at least we can continue doing this now with the scandal being largely behind us. I think there's another purpose behind Zelensky talking about this too. And I think that other purpose is Donald Trump right now is laser focused in on the trade war with China. The sanctions have escalated well over 100%. The Chinese are targeting auto manufacturers. The Chinese are targeting NVIDIA. The Chinese are targeting Boeing. That's a real shot across the bow at, American stocks, considering how much that backs a lot of people's 401ks, Boeing. And so they're not only just escalating the tariff percentages, but now they're targeting specific sections of the American economy as the Trump administration escalates in kind. And as this trade war escalates, and Donald Trump goes from, oh, let's cut the military budget in half to let's have a $1 trillion Pentagon budget, where does all that money go towards? As Donald Trump's talking about pulling back from Europe, where does all that money go towards? As there's, as they're considering like, simplifying command structure across the world, where's all this money going to go towards? As they're cutting corners while increasing the amount of capital available, where's all this money going to go towards? Well, a lot of it is going to go towards the Pacific. One thing that this administration seems to broadly agree on is that they want to assert themselves in Asia, that China is a rising power, and they see it as the near peer-to-peer competitor of the United States in the Pacific, both due to, the trade routes that China would like to have some naval dominance over, and they're trying to assert naval dominance over, the nation state of Taiwan, the island nation, and that continuing conflict, as well as a host of other issues, but those are probably two of the biggest. And Trump has bought into this, at least into some capacity, into this idea that there are peer-to-peer competitor, and we need to, challenge their rise and assert ourselves in the region. But to do that, you need resources. And so the argument by Elbridge Colby and these other staffers that have been brought into the Trump administration is we need to divert our resources from elsewhere towards Asia. Now, that theory has been tested with Donald Trump's massive bombing campaign of the Houthis, which has strained other commands of resources are sucked back into the Middle East. But this basic philosophy seems to be consistent throughout much of the upper echelons of the Trump administration, from Marco Rubio to, to J.D. Vance, to really most of them. They seem to generally agree on this. And so if they generally agree on this, and Zelensky can prove that the Chinese not only have their own citizens fighting on the front line, which could mean nothing, probably would mean a lot more if the Chinese could capture, if the Ukrainians could capture, a Chinese forward observer that's monitoring Russian military activity to learn and improve the Chinese armed forces. I think that, which is possible under current conditions, would probably be more significant. But to prove that Chinese weapons are being sold or given to the Russians, expanding Chinese ammunition or gunpowder production capacity in kind, the same way the war is being used to expand Chinese drone production, that's different. That's different. The Trump administration, I think, in its mind, would love to try to split the Chinese and the Russians apart. I don't really know if that's going to be successful considering this day and age, but I think that's something he would like. This is something that could challenge that idea that you could just do this with such ease. So I think that Zelensky is interested in portraying the Russians and the Chinese as in deeper and deeper cahoots, as an alliance, as an axis together that is going to be challenging American influence, not only in Europe, but also in Asia, in coordination. That both of these powers have an interest in knocking the United States down a peg. And therefore, the conclusion would be, why don't you support Ukraine in making sure Russia and China's goal is not seen through? At least that's what I think Zelensky's intention of bringing so much attention to this is. Definitely in the fallout of those Chinese citizens getting captured. By the way, if you go to the Kiev Independent YouTube channel, you can actually see an interview with one of these Chinese soldiers that they released. You can see it right here. So these are actually not one of them. It's multiple Chinese soldiers. Now, again, I don't think these are forward observers or people who are still in the PLA. What I think this is almost certainly, again, private Chinese citizens that used to be in the PLA, retired, saw the high money, the high monetary offers being made by Russia and took the opportunity. Still kind of interesting, though. Let's look at a little bit of this interview. The world must know about the involvement of foreign nationals in Russia's war against Ukraine. Following an order from the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, today the Security Service of Ukraine is organizing a press conference with the prisoners of war, citizens of the People's Republic of China who fought on Russia's side. Last July, Guang Zhong lost his job. He was scrolling through TikTok and he came across well-made ads for the Russian army, which can attract people's attention. That's why he started to inquire about what this service in the Russian army was all about. Wang Guangzhong initially wanted to get a job related to medical rehabilitation, as he had been doing that kind of work in China. And through an intermediary, he was looking specifically for that kind of job in Russia. But when he ended up in the Russian army, he had no choice but to do whatever job he was assigned. In China, I had a regular job, a classic 9 to 5. I had a family, a wife, parents. But because I lost my job during the COVID epidemic, I decided to find this kind of side gig. At first, they always offer work related to something else. For example, Renabu was offered a job related to construction. This is something that different Africans that had been convinced to join the Russian army had said too, that they had actually been offered like, hey, and this is not just when it comes to like, active participation in the armed forces, but also weapons production. It's like, hey, come here and study and you can be a student. And you come over, it's like, have you ever known what it's like to make a bomb? Or different variations of that. Although he had worked in China as a firefighter and rescuer and the pay was good, still, they offered more for going to war. At first, they offered construction, and then it turns into something else. And once you get there, you can't change anything. They take advantage of the trust Chinese citizens have in Russia, luring them in to what can only be called a trap. We didn't know exactly how much we would be paid. We only knew there would be different pay grades, like 80,000 rubles, 160,000, 200,000, 260,000, but we didn't know the exact amount we'd get. In reality, even the money along with the phone where the card app was installed would often be taken by the Russians under the pretext of fuel expenses, chargers, and other needs. So I really couldn't use that money at all. On Chinese social media, especially TikTok, you can see videos featuring people in military uniforms. In China, being in the military is a very prestigious status, but not everyone can get that opportunity. So someone might be tempted by one of these videos and, not being able to serve in China, decide to join military actions elsewhere. Moreover, there is strong propaganda in China promoting friendly relationships with Russia, and perhaps that's the result of this type of advertising campaign. It makes people trust Russia more and more and get involved in these things. First, we went to Rostov, then from Rostov to Donetsk. And from Donetsk, we were taken by trucks and vans to the deployment destination. At first, I refused to take part in combat, but then I was sent to the front anyway. We lived in a place where there was no water, no electricity, and we were fed only once a day. They forced us to do heavy physical labor, and sometimes the reward was just a handful of rice. These living conditions were quite normal there. I remember when I arrived in Moscow, I exchanged 3,000 won for rubles. And the whole time in camp, I had to spend money like on chargers. If you refused to hand over money, they would threaten to send you to the front lines. So if you want to watch the rest of it, there's a few minutes left. I'll leave the rest of it for you guys to watch. Actually, no, we're only like 2 minutes. I only got 2 minutes left. I wanted to watch just half of it, but we're already like 70% done, so let's just finish it. There were 10 of us in our unit. 2 of us were Chinese citizens. From April 1st to April 4th, they carried out tasks. But the instructions were given in Russian, which they didn't understand. So things were shown to them through gestures and signs. They were sent here and there, to a mountain, to a forest, to some bunkers, until they were eventually shown where to shoot. All of it was communicated with gestures. So the problem that they have in Russia is they don't have enough translators. They don't have enough military translators to make up for the foreign fighters that they're coming in, that they're bringing in. It was especially an issue when it came to the North Korean soldiers, where they only had, the reports I read was like 1 translator for something like every 50 to 70 men, a ridiculous amount. But I don't know if those numbers are accurate. But I mean, the point is though, the reports are that they don't have a lot of translators for foreign soldiers. They weren't even sure if the target was their own bunker or a neighboring one. At first, their commander thought it was a joke. But then Ukrainian drones appeared in large numbers and started bombing them. That's when, as I understand it, they were captured in the field. Before I ended up in the war, I knew almost nothing about Ukraine, just what I saw in the news. But after we were taken prisoner, we were transported to a safe place. We are treated well. They even brought us McDonald's. Overall, they treat us well. We have a good impression. For our fellow citizens who might want to take part in this war, we want to say it's not worth it. Everything we heard from the Russians was a lie. And it turns out Russia isn't that strong, and Ukraine isn't that weak. So it's better not to participate in wars at all. I've already said this, and I want to repeat. Our actions in Ukraine had nothing to do with our government. We did this purely out of personal reasons. So this would, again, emphasize the fact that these are personal individuals going for money, for profit, mercenaries, you could say. Who are going over to make money because they saw it as an opportunity to get high pay for what they thought was going to be construction work, at least from the way they put it. But I do want to put out there that, number one, you need to understand that these people are Ukrainian prisoners. And so taking everything they say at face value might not be smart. I'm not saying that I believe that they're mistreated or they were threatened. You have to say this or that, but you need to, don't be naive and understand that they are prisoners. And so, you know, we can't take exactly everything that they say the same way we would take somebody who is not a prisoner, what they were saying at face value. The other thing I want to throw out there is that when they say things like, for example, I had no idea what was going on in Ukraine. I just came here for personal reasons. And, you know, I've been treated so well. And, you know, the Russians, and they say all this stuff about the Russians. I'm not saying that none of the stuff that they said isn't true. I think a lot of it, there's a good chance it is true. But do remember that when somebody says something like, oh, I had no clue what was going on here, it could be very well the case that they did know what was going on here. They had very good idea what was going on there, but they just went anyway. And now that they've been captured, it's more convenient to say that you didn't know about Bucha, that you didn't know what happened in Izium, that you didn't know what this war is about. Because if you did know, and you said, of course I knew what this war is about, maybe the treatment will not be as pleasant, and the story you can tell will not be as sympathetic. Real war is completely different from what you see in movies or on TV. Nothing is the way we thought it would be. The only thing I regret is I want to apologize to my parents. My only wish now is to go back. So I'll do everything, follow every instruction to make that happen.
Join our mission.
Okay, Kiev Independent. I've been offered interviews with prisoners before, Russian prisoners. I always say no. I always said no. I've been offered it like 2 or 3 times, and I always come back with the same response. And it's not that I don't think I could find anything of value from that interview. It's just that it is impossible for me to verify the status of their conditions when I'm not in the room And so it's just, I don't know how much value I could really get from the interview and be able to say, yep, this is his opinion. I mean, I guess that exists anytime you're in some institution and you're like interviewing somebody, like if you're interviewing a police officer or a soldier, like the fact that their pay or their treatment could be derived from like how they conduct themselves, maybe in an interview. Not in my case, I haven't found that to be the case, but you could see it. It's not hard to imagine it. Like there's always going to be these like coercive, you know, influences, but when you're specifically imprisoned, that's a very strong form of coercion that somebody could take advantage of. I I I, I don't think at any point I'm gonna be like interviewing one of these soldiers like, yeah, you're right, the Ukrainians beat me every day.